Western Mortician. The Undertaker entered WWF at Survivor Series 1990 as Ted DiBiase's mystery partner. His look set him apart immediately. A black trench coat, gray gloves, wide-brimmed hat, and a slow, deliberate walk that projected the aura of a mortician. At 6'10", he was presented as almost superhuman. He showed no emotion, absorbed punishment without reaction, and then sat up suddenly after knockdowns. This no-sell response became the foundation of the character's menace. At first, he was managed by Brother Love, but in early 1991, Paul Bearer took over. Bearer, a pale, trembling funeral director character, carried a golden urn that was said to control the Undertaker's power. The pairing reinforced the funeral theme while giving the act a distinctive voice in interviews and at ringside. Television matches emphasized dominance. He used basic strikes, choking holds, a rope walk arm drag later known as Old School, and his finisher, the Tombstone Pile Driver. Post-match segments often ended with him placing opponents into a zippered body bag, dragging them away as if delivering corpses. Just 1 year after debuting, he was placed in the main event scene. At Survivor Series 1991, with help from Ric Flair, The Undertaker defeated Hulk Hogan for the WWF Championship. This was a major upset. Hogan had been the company's untouchable star throughout the 1980s. Hogan argued that Ric Flair's interference had directly caused the loss, and WWF officials agreed the finish was too tainted to stand. This era established that The Undertaker wasn't just a gimmick for spectacle. He was positioned as a credible main event threat, able to defeat the company's biggest draw, and the Mortician persona proved it could carry a long-term storyline. He'd already buried Hulk Hogan's aura once, but how do you keep a dead man down when the rest of the roster starts lining up to try? The dead man evolves. Following his brief championship run in 1991, The Undertaker spent the next 2 years establishing himself as a permanent main event presence. During this period, his character shifted from a one-note mortician to something darker and more enduring. In 1992, he turned babyface for the first time. His feud with Jake the Snake Roberts culminated at WrestleMania 8, where Undertaker sided against Roberts' villainy. The match was short, but symbolically important. It proved that the aura of the character worked just as well as a crowd favorite, not just as a villain. Later that year, his rivalry with Kamala introduced one of his signature match types, the casket match. At Survivor Series 1992, Undertaker defeated Kamala in what was billed as the first televised casket match. In 1993, he feuded with Giant Gonzalez, a 7-foot-plus opponent presented as a monstrous figure in a muscle-patterned bodysuit. Though the storyline was criticized, it reinforced Undertaker's image as the WWF's monster killer, the one character capable of withstanding even the most exaggerated threats in the company's roster of cartoonish gimmicks. The true transformation came in 1994. At that year's Royal Rumble, Undertaker was defeated by Yokozuna in a heavily stacked casket match where nearly the entire heel roster interfered. After the lid closed, smoke rose from the coffin and a video projection of Undertaker appeared, vowing he would not rest and would one day return. This was the first time WWF openly framed him as something beyond human, a character who could transcend defeat. When he returned at SummerSlam 1994, his appearance reflected the change. The gloves and boots were now purple. The arena lights during his entrance shifted to blues and purples, and the supernatural imagery of resurrection became central to his presentation. WWF's most colorful era was built on cartoon heroes and villains. So what happens when the darkest character on the roster gets locked in a casket and claims he'll rise from it? Phantom Undertaker. In late 1995, The Undertaker suffered a legitimate injury when Mabel struck him with a heavy blow to the face, fracturing his orbital bone. Instead of taking time off, he returned wearing a black leather protective mask. The visual immediately drew comparisons to the Phantom of the Opera, and the nickname Phantom Undertaker stuck. The mask gave him an even more intimidating presence. It made him look less like a man and more like a creature being held together by force. His promos during this time were darker and more guttural, while his in-ring style leaned into heavier strikes and brawling. The injury that could have sidelined him instead became part of his mystique. Storylines built around this new image included a grudge match against Mabel, turning his real injury into an on-screen rivalry. He also feuded with Goldust, whose flamboyant, unsettling persona created a sharp contrast with Undertaker's grim, masked figure. Their rivalry peaked at In Your House 8, Beware of Dog in May 1996, with a casket match that underscored their clash of styles. These rivalries reinforced his status as a supernatural constant, at a time when much of WWF's roster relied on cartoonish or short-lived gimmicks. By early 1996, the mask was no longer needed and was removed, but the Phantom Undertaker era left a lasting impression. It proved that, even when injured, the character could adapt, evolve, and grow stronger, turning a legitimate setback into another chapter of his legend. Lord of Darkness. By mid-1996, The Undertaker's look changed again. The gray and purple accents were gone, replaced with black leather gear and a more severe appearance. A teardrop tattoo beneath his eye and darker presentation marked the beginning of the Lord of Darkness era. His persona shifted fully into gothic horror, less mortician and more supernatural figure. This phase introduced some of his most defining match types. At SummerSlam 1996, he faced Mankind in the first ever Boiler Room Brawl. The match ended with Paul Bearer turning on him and siding with Mankind. The betrayal was pivotal. The urn, once the symbol of Undertaker's power, was now against him, forcing the character to stand alone for the first time. 2 months later came the first Buried Alive match, where the objective was to bury an opponent under dirt to win. This stipulation extended Undertaker's association with death imagery and positioned him as the central figure in WWF's most experimental matches. In October 1997, he battled Shawn Michaels in the first Hell in a Cell at Bad Blood. The match was brutal and innovative, but it became legendary for what followed. Kane debuted, tearing the door off the cell and confronting his brother. Paul Bearer's revelation of Kane's survival in the family fire gave Undertaker a blood feud that would define the next 2 decades of his career. Undertaker's promos also evolved. He no longer relied on short threats like "rest in peace." His delivery became slower, lower, and more symbolic, speaking in parables about souls, damnation, and eternal punishment. By 1997, The Undertaker was more than just the dead man. He was the dark centerpiece of WWF's transition into the Attitude Era, carrying its most dangerous matches and storylines on his shoulders. Paul Bearer's betrayal proved Undertaker could stand alone. But when his supposed long-lost brother ripped the door off Hell in a Cell, his story turned into something much bigger than survival. Ministry of Darkness. By 1998, The Undertaker's persona had become darker than ever. The Lord of Darkness transformed into the leader of a cult-like faction known as the Ministry of Darkness. His presentation shifted to long, hooded robes, ominous entrances, and the appearance of a zealot guiding his followers. The storyline centered on ritual and control. Undertaker staged sacrifices of other wrestlers, tying them to his symbol or subjecting them to ceremonies that blurred the line between wrestling and horror. On one episode of Raw, he bound Steve Austin to a giant Undertaker symbol and raised him above the stage in a mock crucifixion. On another, he attempted to forcibly marry Stephanie McMahon, casting himself as a dark authority over the McMahon family. The ministry included the Acolytes, Midian, Viscera, and the Brood, who portrayed loyal followers. Together, they acted less like a typical wrestling stable and more like a cult, treating Undertaker as their messiah. In mid-1999, the ministry merged with Vince McMahon's corporation to form the Corporate Ministry. This gave Undertaker storyline power over the entire WWF. Unlike most top stars, he was not chasing championships during this era. His focus was control, domination, and influence. The Ministry of Darkness fit perfectly into the edgier Attitude Era, where WWF regularly pushed boundaries with shock value and darker themes. For a while, Undertaker stopped chasing titles and started chasing power. But in 2000, the dead man would trade the supernatural for something nobody expected: denim, bandanas, and a Harley. American Badass. After several months away, The Undertaker returned at Judgment Day in May 2000 with a completely new identity. Instead of long coats and supernatural mannerisms, he rode a Harley-Davidson motorcycle to the ring, wearing a bandana, sunglasses, and leather. The return came during the Iron Man match between The Rock and Triple H, where Undertaker stormed in and dismantled the McMahon-Helmsley faction. This version became known as the American Badass. The character spoke and wrestled more like a real person. Promos were direct, without supernatural themes. Matches emphasized brawling and endurance rather than slow, methodical pacing. His entrance music shifted too. First, Kid Rock's American Badass, then Limp Bizkit's Rollin'. Both reinforced the biker aesthetic and tied him to the era's music culture. He immediately targeted top stars. Feuds with The Rock, Kurt Angle, and Triple H established him as a major force again. In December 2000, he headlined Armageddon in the first 6-man Hell in a Cell match. The match is remembered for Rikishi being thrown off the structure onto a truck bed, a moment that underscored Undertaker's role as a violent enforcer. During this era, he focused less on singles championships and more on dominance in the tag team division. Reuniting with Kane as the Brothers of Destruction, he won multiple tag titles and even briefly teamed with The Rock to hold championship gold. The American Badass was the most radical change of his career to that point. By shedding the supernatural and leaning into grit and realism, Undertaker showed that his presence could survive even without the dead man image. Big Evil. By early 2002, the American badass persona hardened into something more ruthless. Undertaker cut his hair short, kept the motorcycle entrance, and added MMA-style gloves and chain accessories. This version became known as Big Evil. The character relied less on spectacle and more on blunt violence. Undertaker presented himself as a veteran who demanded respect. His trademark line during this time, "I'm gonna make you famous," was not a catchphrase, but a threat. He immediately delivered on that promise. At WrestleMania 18, he fought Ric Flair in a brutal brawl that highlighted his shift from supernatural to viciously real. A few months later, he faced Jeff Hardy in a ladder match on Raw. Undertaker won, but Hardy's resilience earned his respect, and the match elevated Hardy's reputation across the company. His most punishing rivalry came against Brock Lesnar. Their Hell in a Cell match at No Mercy 2002 was remembered for its brutality. Undertaker bled heavily and endured relentless punishment, but in doing so, helped establish Lesnar as a legitimate top star of the new Ruthless Aggression era. Undertaker also won the Undisputed Championship again in 2002, defeating Hulk Hogan at Judgment Day. That victory tied his career together across eras, as he had now beaten Hogan both in the early 1990s and again a decade later. The Big Evil era ended at Survivor Series 2003 when Kane buried him alive. But this wasn't the end of Undertaker's story. What rose from that grave would not ride a motorcycle. It would bring back the myth that first defined him. Return of the Deadman. At WrestleMania 20 in 2004, The Undertaker returned to his roots. The arena went dark, the bell tolled, and he walked through the fog in the black coat and wide brim hat that had made him famous. Paul Bearer accompanied him once again, restoring the full Deadman era. But this was not a rewind of 1990. He now wore MMA-style gloves and blended striking offense with his traditional arsenal. It was a hybrid, part myth, part fighter. His first feud back was against Kane, ending with victory at WrestleMania 20. From there, he was treated less as a regular roster member and more as a legend. Each rivalry became about testing him, measuring whether the next generation could stand against the Deadman. In 2005, Randy Orton stepped forward as the Legend Killer. Their feud stretched across the year, including WrestleMania 21 and multiple rematches. It elevated Orton's standing and cemented Undertaker as the final obstacle for rising stars. Around the same time, he clashed with JBL over the WWE Championship and defeated Mark Henry in a casket match at WrestleMania 22. The pinnacle came in 2007. Undertaker won the Royal Rumble, last eliminating Shawn Michaels in a dramatic finish, and chose to face Batista at WrestleMania 23. Their match was fast, physical, and widely praised as one of the best heavyweight bouts of its era. Undertaker won the World Heavyweight Championship, showing he could still deliver at the very highest level. By the end of this run, Undertaker had fully transformed into WWE's final boss. His presence alone gave matches a heightened sense of stakes, and soon, WrestleMania itself would revolve around his undefeated streak, a record that turned the event into his personal battleground. The Streak Era. By 2008, The Undertaker's career was no longer about weekly television. His appearances became rare, but each one carried enormous weight. The focus shifted away from championships and onto WrestleMania. His undefeated record there, simply called The Streak, became the centerpiece of his legacy. At WrestleMania 25 in 2009, he faced Shawn Michaels in a match widely regarded as one of the greatest in WWE history. Their rematch at WrestleMania 26 carried even higher stakes, with Michaels' career on the line. When Undertaker won again, Michaels retired, and the streak felt untouchable. In 2011 and 2012, Triple H became the challenger. At WrestleMania 27, Undertaker won, but had to be stretchered out, showing the physical toll. At WrestleMania 28, the two met inside Hell in a Cell with Shawn Michaels as referee. Marketed as the end of an era, the match was symbolic, the last time three of the Attitude Era's central figures would headline together. Undertaker's victory closed that chapter of WWE history. At WrestleMania 29 in 2013, he faced CM Punk in a feud fueled by the real-life death of Paul Bearer. Punk mocked Undertale's late manager through the build-up, giving the match a deeply personal edge. Undertaker won, extending the streak to 21-0. Then came WrestleMania 30 in 2014. Undertaker faced Brock Lesnar, but suffered a concussion early in the match and wrestled the rest without clear memory of it. The finish stunned the world. Lesnar won clean, ending the streak at 21. The silence in the arena captured how much the streak had grown beyond wrestling itself. For 2 decades, it had been WrestleMania's true main event. Its end felt like the impossible had happened. The streak era defined Undertaker as more than a superstar. He was WrestleMania's foundation, the measure by which careers were made. But when it ended, it showed for the first time ever that even the dead man could fall. The Final Chapters. After the end of the streak, The Undertaker's presence remained, but his role shifted. Each appearance was less about chasing championships and more about testing how long the dead man could endure. At WrestleMania 31 in 2015, he faced Bray Wyatt in a battle framed as supernatural successor versus original. Undertaker won, reinforcing that no imitator could replace him. The following year at WrestleMania 32, he met Shane McMahon inside Hell in a Cell. The defining moment was Shane's leap from the top of the structure, but when the dust settled, Undertaker was the one who walked out victorious. At WrestleMania 33 in 2017, Undertaker lost to Roman Reigns in a match built as the passing of the torch to WWE's new franchise star. Afterward, he removed his hat, gloves, and coat, leaving them in the ring. The gesture was treated as a symbolic retirement, with the crowd believing the story was over. But the dead man returned. At WrestleMania 34 in 2018, he defeated John Cena in a short match designed as spectacle and fan service. Sporadic appearances followed, yet the true finale came 2 years later at WrestleMania 36. In the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, without a live audience, Undertaker faced AJ Styles in a cinematic Boneyard Match. Blending stunts, editing, and theatrical imagery, it pulled from every phase of his career: the biker entrance, the supernatural aura, the final boss presence. He ended the night standing tall as Metallica's music played. Later that year at Survivor Series 2020, exactly 30 years after his debut, The Undertaker gave his official farewell. No opponent interrupted, no storyline twist followed. The ring was left to him alone, closing 3 decades of wrestling history with silence, respect, and the image of the dead man's final walk. Months later, WWE aired the documentary series The Last Ride, where Undertaker himself confirmed he was retired, finally putting the dead man to rest, this time for real.